Get in, nerds. We're playing Victoria 3. I put a lot of energy into that, but truthfully, this is going to be a very relaxed playthrough because we're going to be playing Victoria 3 as kind of a city builder type situation. We're not going to be engaging in a lot of warfare or anything like that. We're just going to be chilling, developing our economy and our society. So this is going to be a no achievements run. Some of you who have already figured out what's going on will have noticed that I've annexed Denmark. I've given the North Sea territories to Norway. Greenland has been made independent, and then I gave Denmark's overseas territories to other people. Danish Togo has been claimed by the Ashanti people over here, and we've given the Danish West Indies to France. So there's no Denmark. This is a Denmarkless run. This will be an any percent Denmarkless run that we're doing here. So my goal is I'm going to not really engage in any kind of warfare while we're doing this. We're just going to be a very chill Sweden, and we'll see how things go. So we're going to end up forming Scandinavia once we got the technology, but for now we're not going to worry about that. So we got a few things to take care of. Just look at what we've got in buildings here. So first of all, we've got two construction sectors, and we've been both on iron frame. This is the first episode, but there's going to be like an explainer here, where I'm going to talk about what all the stuff does. But that's not yet. We want these on iron frame so that we can build at the fastest rate. We've got a little bit of a deficit, so we're going to go ahead and enact some consumption taxes to see if we can't rectify that. It looks like fish is actually a pretty good thing to tax, so I'm going to go ahead and put taxes on fish for now, and I think we'll leave our authority here for now, and that'll be good. We need our ports on cargo ports so that they can output convoys, and we're going to immediately start incorporating the Danish states. That's going to eat through all of our excess bureaucracy, and that's okay. So in the course of 5 years, we'll be in debt a little bit. Hopefully this will go down though, and we'll have those states incorporated. We got a righteous government with the landowners in the Church of Sweden. Well, just brief introduction to the politics screen here. Our landowners are quite powerful, but our Church of Sweden and our intelligentsia are both reasonably strong. Our armed forces and industrialists are moderately strong. Rural folk and petite bourgeoisie are not at all powerful. So that's a pretty functional government. In terms of law changes, we are kind of where I want to be. I'm going to start with this going slow. Let me just make sure that this is... Okay, that's right. We're in the post-Glory to the Queen applause. You're going to see me open the music player and go to the next bit of soundtrack a lot here. Actually, I am going to turn that down just a little bit, because this soundtrack is a little loud. Just cut that down just a bit. Alright, sorry, hold on. That's not what we want. We want this down. Alright, there we go. Perfect. Alright, good content. Good content. High professionalism. So, I'm just going to introduce you to our government. We have an oligarchic monarchy here. So, our king, Karl Johan Bernadotte, aligns with the landowners. That's making them necessary to keeping the government legitimate, which we absolutely need to do. This government legitimacy will generate loyalists every month, and will increase the number of loyalists we get from standard of living increases, and that's critical to the long-term health of our country. Loyalists are people who are very happy. Radicals are people who are very mad. That's just kind of how the game's going to go. However, Karl Johan Bernadotte here is very old, and his heir apparent aligns with the intelligentsia. So basically, we're going to keep our politics pretty stable where they are for now, and we're going to liberalize a little bit once an intelligentsia leader is in power, because the intelligentsia are very much about liberalization. I'll talk about that as we go on. Right now I'm just going to kind of do the things we need to do to get started, and then I'm going to put us onto speed 1 and just get us going so that we can have everything we want to have. But people don't want apples. Well, gosh, that's a surprise. Let's get everyone using harvesting tools. So we should start logging camps. We want everyone using sawmills, and then everyone producing hardwood. We're currently exporting hardwood to the United Kingdom, I believe. We have some states that are low on infrastructure. You can see the net infrastructure in the lower right here of this window, all the way over to the right. So I'm just going to increase the infrastructure of those states. And that's kind of what we're going to do to start. In terms of technological research, a near-term goal is to get to pan-nationalism, because that's what we need to form the country of Scandinavia. With that having been said, it's not a rush. And I think primarily our current priority is actually to rush railroads. So I'm just going to click the... Oh, I don't actually want mechanical tools first. I want atmospheric pump engine first. Then I'll do mechanical tools, then we'll do railways. This is the tech queue here. Atmospheric pump engine I want as fast as possible because that helps our mines. It allows us to spend some additional coal and tools, improving our mines' capacity to function. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started here, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing and about our needs here. Artillery and small arms are expensive. We've got a lot of barracks. We're gonna have some debt in the early part of the game, but hopefully it's going to get cleared up as we get these states incorporated. Currently, the Danish states are not paying taxes, and that's part of why they are, because I just annexed them using the console commands. They won't pay taxes until they're fully incorporated. So yeah, so that's why we're in the red here. In fact, I think I might... Oh, I don't want to boost taxes right away, but I think it'll be vital for our long-term stability if I do, so... Ooh, that is... Okay, there we go. That's much better. It is what it is. We'll be able to put them back down later, once our markets have stabilized and everything. So, let's talk about I'm going to talk about politics or economy first. I think we're going to talk about economy first things first. Here are the buildings we have. Buildings are separated out into urban, rural, development, and construction. Construction just consists of construction industries. Those show the construction industries that we have and the stuff we're currently building, which is 2 ports to solve the infrastructure problems of these 2 states. As you can see, we're pretty low on infrastructure in these states. This one's at... Come on. Are we still in here? Oh, Netherlands, freaking stop it. Sorry, I'm gonna start improving relations with some of my neighbors here so that I can not get into arguments. I'm not really into war in this situation here. Alright, so the reason we're building ports is to keep these infrastructure up. When states have negative infrastructure, you can see these percentages here. This is percentage access to our market. I'm going to talk about the market a little later, but the very short version is it's very bad to have low market access. So we want to avoid that, and that's what we're building these ports here for. This one's going to take 37 weeks, and this one's going to take the same. As we get our finances better, we'll build more construction sectors, and that'll help make things easier. Now, under rural, you're going to find your agriculture and your extraction industries. So these are going to be your industries that basically mostly don't have resource inputs. They produce goods, but they don't spend them typically. So we have our rye farms here. These consume a very small number of tools, and they're consuming tools because we have tools here in our automation methods. And they output grain and liquor. They output liquor because the potatoes, secondary method, adds a liquor output and reduces the total grain output. And this makes the farms more profitable, which is, generally speaking, what we want out of businesses. As you can see when we mouse over these options, it shows the differential substitution in profits for the total of the industry. So apple orchards is going to be 4,500 pounds a week less profitable, and not producing potatoes and mostly producing grain is going to be similarly unprofitable. So we're producing potatoes because people like buying liquor. And that's actually good for me because I've got a consumption tax on liquor. So that's producing money for the government. So, rye farms produce most of the food and a lot of the liquor, although some of our liquor is produced in subsistence facilities as well. Next we've got livestock ranches. These output a small amount of meat and a large amount of fabric per level. We've got 20 levels of them and 25 levels of rye farms. So we've got a pretty solid agricultural industry here. One thing that's definitely on the medium-term docket is increasing our use of tools to output additional meat, but that's for very far away from now. Because right now our primary thing is we're trying to get our infrastructure up, and then we're going to start outputting the tools that we need. As you can well, our standard of living is basically pretty stable. Taxes went up, but that's only been a month. They'll probably go down later. Again, hopefully we'll be able to drop the taxation back down to medium a little later. So we've got 7 iron mines. Mostly these are completely being done via picks and shovels is the primary production method. Once we get finished with that first technology that I queued up, we'll be able to go to the atmospheric pump engine. That's going to allow us to add a coal and a tools input to increase iron outputs. One of the big parts of this game is multiplying outputs up, which allows you to output more stuff, which allows your society to have more stuff. Moving right along here, we've actually got a large logging industry and a large fishing industry as well. Both of those are key. The logging industry produces wood and hardwood, and the fishing industry produces fish. So it consumes. We're currently using a trawler method that inputs a good called clippers. Those are small boats produced out of shipyards. That's the thing we're going to need a lot of over time, but currently we don't need that much of. And that outputs fish. So we've got our food resources, our iron, our wood, and our fish. What do we use those for? Well, we use them in these industries to produce goods. So, for example, paper mills turn wood into paper, which we need for a variety of functions. Most pressingly, we need it for government buildings. Our tooling workshops are currently making tools out of wood and iron. We're using some of the wood there as well, and we're outputting a ton of tools. We're also using some of the iron from our mines there. Textile mills use the fabric produced by our ranches to produce clothes at a pretty good rate. Clothes are generally better for pops to consume than raw fabric. So this doesn't look like that big of a deal, trading 40 fabric for 45 clothes per level, but it actually is because clothes satisfy pops' clothing needs better than raw fabric does. Okay? And then finally we have shipyards that use wood and fabric to produce clippers, which are those small civilian ships, and man-o'-wars, which are the military ship resource. The next private industrial building we have is the arms industry. These consume hardwoods. Again, those are produced by our logging camps, and they also consume iron, and they output small arms and artillery, and those the government buys in order to fund the barracks here in the development buildings. Our production methods for our barracks currently require 1 unit of small arms and 1 unit of artillery for every level of barracks, and we have 51 levels of barracks. So having 3 units of small arms are about what we need. The rest of these buildings work a little differently. Arts academies are also private industry. They produce fine art out of paper. The AI is going to build a lot of arts academies because art is very expensive. The problem is we're not going to be able to do anything with that because there's not much of a market for it. It's just a high expense good overall. But once we're outputting a certain amount of it, we'll be able to export it to Britain, which kind of chronically is shoving art in its mouth every every hour of every day. So we're going to get a lot of. So our arts academies are going to get properly paid once that happens. But for the moment, the AI is just going to invest a lot of its own money in arts academies, and we're going to kind of talk about how that works in a little bit. Government buildings are owned by the government. They consume paper, and they produce bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a capacity that we have up here. We get it from our base and from government administrations, and then we can spend it on, number one, keeping incorporated states incorporated, number two, having trade routes, number three, having generals and admirals, and number four, on institutions, which are going to be made accessible due to our laws, and those are going to benefit our country in various ways. Next level is universities. Universities are going to output two really important things, which are innovation and qualifications. Innovation is a resource that is spent on the tech tree. So this is being researched. That's not great, but it is what it is. This is the atmospheric engine. We're researching it at a rate of 54 innovation per week. As you can see, we get 50 as our baseline, and we get 2 each from our 2 universities. We have one in Scania and one in Svealand. I'm going to apologize to anyone who's from Scandinavia for how I'm pronouncing these states. It is what it is. I'm from the United States, and I could probably after this I'll look up some pronunciation stuff, but for the moment I'm just going to kind of guess. Anyway, I hope it's not too bad. So that's what universities do. These both consume paper, and that's why we have all those paper mills, because you gotta have paper to do government stuff. Then we've got our urban centers. These are generated procedurally based on the amount of urbanization in each state. Each of these states has a certain... Buildings are built in particular states. So each state has buildings in it. For example, in Götaland here, we have... we'll be actually able to see the buildings that are in these places. I'm not super familiar, but we've got a government administration. I think that is going to be... I think that might be this building, but I'm not sure. Let's see if it's in our other city here in Kalmar. No, that's a mining town. Excuse me. Anyway. Each of these produces urbanization. Urbanization produces urban centers. I think that's an urban center on the map. So this has an urban center size of 2. And we have 230 urbanization. Come on, lock in. Hold on. I'm going to try this one more time, and if it doesn't work, hey, there it goes. So as you can see here, we're getting a small amount of urbanization from the government administration, and then even lower amounts from the different resource industries. Most of those resource industries produce very little urbanization by themselves, only 5 per level. So you can see we've got 3 units of fishing wharves down there, 2 units of iron mines, and 6 units of logging camps. Those are each producing 5 per level, whereas the government administration, we only have 1 level, but it's producing 20 urbanization. But we're getting a whole ton of urbanization from the trade center. When you've got trade routes running, those generate buildings called trade centers that create urbanization, among other things. So Götaland, I'm going to have to look it up. That's silly. I should just be looking it up. But I'm going to do it later because we're already in the session. Götaland's got a total urbanization of 235. Every 200 points of urbanization generates an urban center. Urban centers produce services. Services are very important. So that's what's listed over here under urban centers. We've got a bunch of different production methods for that, which we'll talk about at a later point. Because we're not using them that much to start. And finally, there's these trade centers. Those produce mostly just migration attraction. That's interesting. I guess that makes sense. The big thing... So I've talked about how buildings interact with resources. You have your inputs and your outputs, and those let you do different things. But the other thing buildings do is they use labor. They employ POPs. So I'm going to crack open our textile mills and look at the ones in Svealand. We have 3 levels here, and these are employing 13, and so basically 4.5 thousand laborers per level and 500 shopkeepers per level. And those distribute wages to those POPs. They pay the shopkeepers about double what they pay the laborers. That's partially because the shopkeepers are the owners of the building, so the profits are also being distributed to those POPs. And that's important because those POPs will then turn around and buy the goods output by the various buildings. And all of that gets managed in the market here. I know I said I was going to do an explainer as a separate video. I think we're explaining stuff now, so we might as well just explain it. This is the market. In games like Stellaris or, Civilization or other kind of economy games, it's very common for the economy to operate basically like a centralized command economy. All of the goods that are produced in the various places all go to the central strategic reserve, and then the strategic reserve distributes the input resources that are needed for the various buildings to all the different buildings in the country. In Victoria 3, you don't have that. Instead, you have a market, which determines the price of the goods, of the various goods based on supply and demand, and then all of the goods go to the market, and the various buildings that need goods have to buy those goods from the market. So that's very interesting. That's very different from what's typical. I've chosen to organize these goods by price. That's just going to show us what goods are expensive in our market and what ones are cheap. And the reason I'm doing this, and you'll eventually get to recognize what these icons mean, but the reason I'm doing this is because we should have some things. We don't have anything that we can sell for a good profit abroad, so we're going to stay like that as it is. These numbers are not sorted completely by number. Instead, they're sorted by their relative price compared to their base price. So you can see here, fine art has a ludicrously high base price, but it's not at the highest here because it doesn't have the highest ratio of demand to supply. I know that when you divide by 0, that's not really a number, but we're gonna treat it as though it is. This algorithm that generates these numbers is going to treat it as that. So, for example, you're going to notice that tools have a higher... I think this is just not sorted properly. Okay, here we go. All right. Basically, when things are very cheap, you'll see kind of copper coins here, and then we have these silver coins, and then when they're very expensive, you get to see the gold coins. Anyway, this visual representation is telling you how expensive something is relative to its base price, and that's how you're going to figure out what you need to be producing more of. Because if you get, for example, having a lot of tools and iron be very expensive, that's going to slow down our industrialization. So I think I'm actually going to queue up an additional level of tooling workshops here in our capital state here. I'm also going to include an additional unit of iron mines, and I'm going to produce them up here. And the reason I'm going to produce them up here is because this state, Norland, has a iron mine throughput modifier, meaning that iron mines consume more input resources, but also output more resources in turn when they're in this state. That's what throughput means. It's a bonus to input and output. But essentially it means that whatever the iron mines are doing, they'll be able to do more of it. And that's why this is a good state for iron mines. We also have a modifier called Scandinavian forests, which will increase the throughput of our logging industries in this state. When I'm up here, I'll also be able to mouse over this to see all of the states that have that bonus. So as you can see, Sverige and Gotland have that as well. For this one, the Malmberger. I'm saying it like it's French, but I don't think it is. I'm just going to call this the Iron Mine bonus. I'm going to keep that in my to look up list. That bonus only exists right here in Norland. In Sweden, we have natural harbors. A couple of states have that. It just increases the throughput of shipyards, as well as getting some maxims for other stuff, but I'm not super worried about that in the early game. Gotland also has the Scandinavian Forests one, and we've got Scandinavian soils here in Scania. That's a big bonus to agriculture throughput. And then we've got a slightly less good version of that in Gotland here. Jutland and... Oh, Jutland's the only other place that's got the good soil bonus. These ones are more just kind of infrastructure bonuses. So that's what's going on in our various states. We're going to get more into that as the game goes on, but for now, we're just relaxing. So I think that's... I should also go through and show you sort of why we're building where we're building and what the shape of our demographics look like. So in Svealand, we've got... Basically, the people who are in states are divided into three groups. Unemployed peasants and your gainfully employed people is, I think, the way the game says it. Here we go. So we've got a total population of 4.84, which is about closing in on 5 million people. Of them, about 3/4 are dependents. So those are people who are not participating in the formal economy. They may participate in the informal economy, but not in the formal. And then of the remaining 1.5 million, about half are gainfully employed and the other half are peasants. What is a peasant, and why is it different from being gainfully employed? My friend, that's a great question. Not necessarily endorsing this way of thinking, but this is the game's way of looking at it. When pops don't have... So these buildings only provide a certain amount of jobs. As you can see, these paper mills employ 15,000 employees. It's basically 5,000 people per level. But that number is going to go down as these industries get more and more automated as the game goes on. But for now, it's about 5,000 per level. That's your general thing. But this is not nearly enough to employ all of the people that live in Svealand. Fortunately for them, Svealand has a ton of arable land that they can just go and farm on, and that produces an almost trivial amount of goods here. We get some meat, we get some liquor, some furniture, some services, some clothes, some fabric, some grain, and some wood. But the total amount produced by this 136.4 thousand people is trivially low, and as a result, it guarantees those people a standard of living that's not great. It only pays out 1.25 K total in weekly wages. Let's kind of look at the average annual wage of half of £1. So our peasants are getting 0.29 pounds per week from these agricultural buildings, and that's not great. So those people are gonna, because their wages are very low, because they're living in subsistence, they're gonna have a pretty low standard of living, and that's one of the things that's keeping the lower stratum of our economy with a standard of living that's 10.4, which is not bad, but it's not great. So one of the things that's going on in this game is that over time, we're going to want, ideally, to increase the number of our people who are employed in industrial scale farming rather than subsistence farming, who are producing a profit that will generate a good number of resources for the country, and also will get them better paid, and that's going to increase the size of our economy, and that's what governments want to do in Victoria 3. So that's going to be our kind of goal. Again, personally, I'm not judging subsistence lifestyles. I think if that's what you want to do, that's just delightful, and I encourage you to do it. But this game is built around not doing that. Here's a big announcement. It seems that our ruler, Karl Johann Bernadotte, has passed. This is really early for Karl Bernadotte to pass. And as you can see, because our current ruler aligns with the intelligentsia, our government is now much less legitimate. We're an oligarchic monarchy, which means we basically have to keep the ruler's interest group in power. So right now we're going to reform the government. We're going to boot the Church of Sweden and the landowners out, and we're going to see where we can get some legitimacy from. So right away, you have to put the intelligentsia into the government. That's kind of a non-question. It's going to get us up to unacceptable. We're going to have a good amount from having our head of state's interest group in the government, but we're still not doing great. These three things here, by the way, show you where you can get some legitimacy from. So I can get the industrialists in there to have 54. If I put the industrialists and the armed forces in there, I can have 57. I'm going to get kind of a penalty for having a lot of different interest groups in the government. And I think maybe we'll just put the intelligentsia and the industrialists in there right now. And I think we'll... Wow, this is so early. Carl, you died too young. Too young. He was 74. All right. So, yeah, I think we're just going to put the industrialists and the intelligentsia into power. And now it's time to start liberalizing the country. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch up some of our ownership production methods in our urban buildings. Ownership methods basically dictate who gets the money from the buildings. It's very, very important. It's the blue production method that's all the way to the right of all of these. Most of these industrial buildings have the merchant guilds production method, which gives ownership to shopkeepers. As these buildings get higher later production methods, they will change over to private ownership, which is going to put, for industrial buildings, mostly in the hands of capitalists. Broadly speaking, in terms of politics, shopkeepers will align with the petite bourgeoisie, and capitalists will align with the industrialists. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but it is broadly correct. So, what we have for a lot of our urban buildings, our sort of infrastructure, government, paper-style buildings, is a religious ownership method. So these urban centers are employing 200 clergymen per level. And they're doing that because we have state-run churches in these as the ownership method for these buildings. If we go over to free churches, that's going to reduce the number of clerics and increase the number of clerks, which doesn't seem like a big change, but I assure you it matters a lot. So here's the thing. Clerks mostly align with the intelligentsia, and to a certain extent the petite bourgeoisie, but clerics all align with the Church of Sweden. We're going to do the same thing in our government administrations. We're going to go from having administrative clergy to secular administration. So we're going to have clerics there, and then for universities, we're going to go from having clerical educators to secular educators. That's actually going to be really big because academics are pretty high. Academics are pretty highly paid pops, and they are so they provide a lot of power to the intelligentsia in an oligarchy. In addition, our universities are actually operating on the scholastic education production method. We're going to switch over the philosophy department. Going to philosophy departments increases the amount of innovation and also increases the paper input. They turn paper into innovation. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So that's very funny. Everyone giggle. We're going to go ahead and do that. And what this big change is going to do is it's going to significantly reduce the power of the Church of Sweden and increase the power of the intelligentsia. And that's going to make our government more legitimate over time. Now, why is this important for our long-term plans? I will explain. These are our laws here. Each of these is a category. The thing that's currently being displayed is what the current law is, and then the number here is the number of alternate options we could follow. Speaking very basically, governance principles is what idea the government is built around. Distribution of power is how much power is spread out versus centralized. Citizenship is who's discriminated against and who's not. Church and state is the government's attitude toward religion. Bureaucracy is who staffs the government buildings. Army model is how the army is constituted. Internal security is for internal security. Economic system is the government's attitude toward the economy. Trade policy is the government's attitude toward trade. Taxation is how taxes are farmed. Land reform is who owns the land in the agrarian and the agricultural industries. Colonization is whether or not we colonize and why. Policing is how we keep order. Education is how we educate our people. Health is how we heal the sick. Right, free speech is what you're allowed to talk about. Labor rights is what rights the workers have. Children's rights is whether or not children are allowed to work or not. Rights of women is what rights women have. Welfare is unemployment insurance of various kinds. Migration controls is whether or not you're allowed to move, depending on who you are. And slavery is whether or not there are slaves, whether or not people are allowed to be enslaved. So that's the very short version of what we're doing here. I'm going to get into it a little bit more over here when we talk about ideology, because each of these interest groups has an ideology that's shown here by a group of icons. And if you mouse over the icon, or if you go into their interest group thing here, you can see what each of these icons means. So we're going to talk through what... So we used to have the Church of Sweden in the government. We're going to talk about what they want, and then we're going to look at the intelligentsia and look at what they want. And you'll quickly see why I'm privileging the intelligentsia over the Church of Sweden right now. So, your blue ideology is the ideology of your leader. That can change over time. These red ideologies mostly do not. So our first one's pious. Their stance on the health system is they want there to be charity hospitals. They're neutral about public health insurance, and they dislike no health insurance and private health insurance. On education, they like there being private schools. They don't care if there are no schools, and they're against private... they want there to be private religious schools. They're neutral on not having schools, but they're against public schools or private for-profit schools. That's the pious ideological trait. So they'll be happy the more the schools in the healthcare system are under the control of priests. Moralist here is they're happy with monarchy. They would be okay with theocracy. The only thing they're against is a council republic, and they're neutral on presidential or parliamentary republics. Their stance on church and state is that they're for having a state religion. They're okay with having freedom of conscience, and they oppose state atheism and total separation of church and state. Freedom of conscience is kind of the middle path of the church and state laws. It's basically the state has an official religion, but basically you're free to be marginalized for your religion, but the state will not participate. Under this, you accept an entire group of religions, whereas state religion, you only accept one religion. So basically it means anyone who's Christian is going to be an accepted religious group in our country. So they like that, but more they would like there to be a state religion where only Protestantism is accepted. I am more for the freedom of conscience total separation model, because I'm going to need to use a lot of immigration in order to increase the size of our labor market here in Sweden. That's vital to growing the economy in the long term, and that's why one of the reasons I'm moving away from this. The other traits of moralist here are their stance on citizenship. They endorse national supremacy. They're neutral toward racial segregation and ethno-state. They oppose cultural exclusion, and they strongly oppose multiculturalism. That's another one of those things. I'm probably going to end up going to multiculturalism. It used to be really easy to get to multiculturalism. It's not anymore. They changed up the ideologies in the current patch. We're on patch 1.3.6 now. Because frankly, multiculturalism used to be really, really busted powerful. You'd basically be able to bring in huge waves of immigration that would fuel your economy forever. and have basically infinite growth, and that's not very realistic. So, failing the capacity to change up exactly the way the laws work, the way they wanted to do it, I think they decided to just make it harder to get multiculturalism. And finally, they're patriarchal. They oppose protected speech and like censorship and outlaw dissent, and they're neutral on right of assembly. So, like this again, this is a scale. They want there to be less women's rights and less freedom of speech, and I don't want that. So, that's the Church of Sweden. They like state control. They like religiously controlled education in schools. They like the state controls on religion and keeping the accepted, the ethnic sacred circle small, and they oppose rights of women and free speech. Now, the intelligentsia, on the other hand, are kind of the opposite of a lot of that stuff. They're against slavery and they dislike serfdom. This one's pretty easy to explain. Don't need to go into a lot of details here. I'm not a country that has either serfdom or slavery, so for the sake of this playthrough, this isn't going to matter much. Liberal means they prefer cultural exclusion to more restrictive citizenship laws. Cultural exclusion... So actually, let me look at the citizenship laws here and show you what we're talking about here. Basically, they range from most exclusive, which is ethno-state, to least exclusive, which is multiculturalism. National supremacy is basically... So scaling down here, you get what's called, at the very top here, you get what I refer to as the RAD bonus, which is... Sorry, I'm very thirsty here. Which is increased radicals from... Which is reduced radicals from decreases in standard of living and increased loyalists from increases in standard of living. Basically, at the top, people feel better about when things get better and less bad about when things get worse. That's the takeaway here. And that bonus goes down as you accept more cultures. You also get reduced extra authority. You get a bunch of extra authority here under ethno-state and national supremacy. And that extra authority goes down as you accept more cultures. But accepting more cultures is good for accepting more cultures. And that is a thing that is, generally speaking, good for the country if your standard of living is high, because then people will immigrate here and then you will get your economy growing. So, the very simple breakdown of how this works is every culture's got two traits. In this case, Swedish has Scandinavian and European heritage. That's our core culture, is Swedish. Once we form Scandinavia, which we will be able to do, our core cultures will be Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, and Icelandic. But Danish has the same two traits, and I think Norwegian might as well. Yeah, Norwegian does as well, and Icelandic does as well. So they all have the same two traits. What national supremacy is saying any culture that shares those two traits will be accepted. So right now, Swedish is our primary culture, but Danish and Norwegian and Icelandic all have those same two traits, and so those people are accepted in the culture. Racial segregation means you don't need to share the cultural trait, only the heritage trait, so anyone of European heritage will be accepted under racial segregation. So this is slightly more liberal than national supremacy. Basically, if we go to racial segregation, we'll be accepting the Germans in our territory, as well as, looks like we've got some Sami people, those are European heritage. We've got some Ashkenazic people, those are European heritage as well. So if we go to racial segregation, we'll be accepting everyone we currently have within our borders. None of them will be discriminated against. If we go further down to cultural exclusion, you can get accepted based on either the heritage or the cultural trait. So anyone with the Scandinavian trait will be able to be accepted as well. I don't know that there are Scandinavians that don't have the European heritage trait, but I've been wrong before, and we'll be wrong again later. But anyway, that's the essence of it. And then finally, at the bottom of the citizenship ladder is multiculturalism, which is all cultures are accepted. So that's the basic breakdown of how this works. So your Church of Sweden wants to keep things tight in the national supremacy world. Your intelligentsia wants to liberalize and go to cultural exclusion. That's the very long takeaway of this this discussion. Moving right back to the intelligentsia's desires. So that's their thoughts on citizenship. Policing, they would prefer to have no police, or at the very least professional police. They don't like having local police or militarized police. Internal security, they would like to have an internal security force that primarily... Guaranteed liberties basically means that the internal security mostly concerns itself with making sure that the government doesn't tread on the rights of people and that people don't interfere with one another's rights. Whereas your more restrictive types of internal security, National Guard and secret police, those are explicitly about kind of protecting the government from the people. So therefore, the former of those. Free speech, they like free speech. And then rights of women, they like rights of women. So the intelligentsia and the Church of Sweden basically oppose each other on most things. Anti-clerical is just like the opposite of the ones that the Church of Sweden has. Education system, they want there to be public or for-profit private schools, and they're against religious schools and no schools. Bureaucracy, they want the bureaucrats to be appointed. We've already got appointed bureaucrats, that's chill with us. And a Republican is... It just means they're okay with monarchy, but they would really prefer to have a presidential or parliamentary republic. They oppose a council republic. And finally, distro power, they like people to vote more, they don't like people to vote less. That's the takeaway of this long thing you see down here. We'll get more into distro power laws as we go along. But right now, the key situation is that our government is not particularly liberal. So let's get to changing stuff. My eye in the beginning of the game is mostly oriented towards making sure the landowners stop being so powerful. And the primary thing I think we need to deal with in the laws is turning local police into dedicated police. Almost everyone in our country would prefer this, and in fact, the armed forces would prefer it. But I'm not going to put them in the government. They're a little reactionary in some ways, and I don't want to get a bunch of radicals when I push them out of the government again. So let's just go to dedicated police force. This doesn't have a super duper high chance of progressing when we do it, but it doesn't have a chance of stalling, so that's good. It's going to make most of our interest groups happy. What that'll allow me to do is to increase the institutional investment for law enforcement without making the landowners stronger, and that's something that I need. Dedicated police is generally pretty solid. Basically, the difference between it and what we currently have is that the local police force offsets penalties from turmoil, which are basically when things are going buck wild in a state, there's turmoil, and that makes it hard to build stuff. Let me just look at my construction queue. Okay, we're still building here, so that's fine. It makes it hard to build stuff, and it makes it hard to do stuff, and it makes it hard to get everything you want to get done. So police are there to offset that. Dedicated police have minus 15% state penalties from turmoil per level instead of minus 20%. But local police, because they're only responsible for localities, they tend to bend to the will of the landowners, whoever's powerful in their area, and that makes the landowners more powerful. And I don't want that, because the landowners mostly want things that are bad for the country. So we're going to switch over to dedicated police to deal with that. Dedicated police force also reduces it gives us half of the rad bonus per level. It reduces the amount of radicals from when standard of living goes down, but doesn't increase the number of loyalists from when standard of living goes up. But that's still good. There's also no police, which is no police. Policing is handled entirely by private industry. Militarized police is available way later. I'm probably not going to go with that. Anyway, this is the big law change we're going to try to make in the early part of the game. I think our After that, probably at some point, once we get a movement for it, we're going to change from the tenant farmers land reform ownership to either commercialized agriculture or homesteading. Homesteading will put most of the ownership of the land into the hands of farmers, and commercialized agriculture. Currently, a lot of the land is controlled by landowners. Commercialized agriculture will put a lot of it into the hands of the capitalists, and homesteading into the hands of the farmers. Both of those things are going to be good for us in the long term because we have the industrialists in our government right now. And I haven't talked about what they want, but these guys are classical liberals. They like all of your classical liberal stuff. They like plutocratic power structures. They this stuff is not actually super duper close to classical liberalism, but we'll talk about it a little bit. For governance principles, the takeaway is they like a regular monarchy or republic. Taxation, they like per capita taxation. They dislike. They're neutral about most stuff, but what they don't want is graduated because that makes them pay more taxes. Per capita taxation is a flat tax on every person, the same amount, not the same proportion, the same amount. So. The poorest person and the wealthiest person both pay, their 0.35 pounds per year to the government. That's what they like. Then they like colonial exploitation. That's a form of colonization that makes life in the colonies kind of terrible. We're not necessarily going to do that, but that's okay because they're also okay with not colonizing. I don't plan to do a lot of colonizing. Colonizing will have a tendency to push us into conflict, and I'm not about that because this is going to be a city building run, so we're just gonna chill. Laissez-faire, they like laissez-faire forms of economy. We currently have interventionism, which they're okay with. They would be upset if we had agrarianism or traditionalism, and very upset if we had cooperative ownership, command economy, or banned industry, which is a thing we can do. Trade policy, they like free trade, and they dislike isolation and protectionism. Their stance on children's rights is they want child labor to be allowed. Their stance on labor rights is they don't want workers' protections. Their stance on land reform is they're okay with either tenant farmers or homesteading. They're against commercialized agriculture, and they despise serfdom and collectivized agriculture. They endorse commercialized agriculture. And then finally, individualist. For welfare, they're okay with poor laws, but they don't. Poor laws is the kind of it's the social welfare we have at home. I'll explain a little later, but they dislike wage subsidies and old age pensions. Those are more traditional current welfare policies. For health and education, they like it privatized, fully privatized. For migration, they dislike migration controls because, again, they want more people to work in their factories. So that's the very short version of what the industrialists want. That's going to be very useful to us. We have an event here. A dye works accident in Zealand. Here. There's no dye works. Oh, there's textile mills. That's what that is. So, several workers died today at the Zealand Dye Works when an industrial-sized tub of hot dye accidentally spilled out over the workshop floor and the unsuspecting workers. Locals are upset about the incident, claiming that the poor safety regulations in the hot and dangerous workplace are to blame for the accident, and are urging the government to take action. As rescue workers left the scene, several workshop employees were left dying. We shall all die sooner or later. This gives us a big old mortality bonus and makes our laborers big mad. They shall not have died in vain. It just gives the mortality bonus that makes the trade unions stronger. The trade unions are an interest group I haven't talked about yet. I'm going to go with this one because I absolutely don't want more radicals. Alright, that was a lot. So now we've got a movement to keep local police force, and that means this has got a chance of a stall. So actually I'm going to reform the government again, and I'm going to pull in the armed forces, and that will make this more likely to go forward rather than to stall. Now we have a chance of advance, and a much lower stall chance. I'm just going to keep them in there for now and bite the bullet when they've got to leave. The trade unions are not a big part of our government right now, but they will be in the later part of the game. They're an urban proletarian faction. Mortality just means people are going to die in those states. I'm actually going to try to keep mortality down reasonably well because I want there to be low mortality because my population is very low compared to a lot of my neighbors, and I'm going to need more population if I want to compete with them. We're not necessarily going to be having one session equals 1 year for this entire thing. I've just got it on speed 1 so that the game can get going a little bit while I'm explaining the basics. I still haven't gotten... I thought my first session was going to be mostly explaining what was going on in each of our states to y'all, but I haven't really gotten a chance to do that because there's so much to get through in the early game, and I've mostly just been talking about the very basics of the way the game is constructed. But in any case, it is January 1st of 1837. We've gone through 1 year of gameplay. We've built 1.5 harbors, and our private industry has been building some stuff too, and then we're trying to work on getting our police force to be more dedicated. I've had fun. I hope y'all have had fun, and I'll see y'all on the other side.